love Lenin's theme. It kind of grows on you. So at first you're like, but then like after you listen to it about 10 times, you're dancing to it. So, and thanks again, James Cole Cash, for making Lenin's theme. It's awesome. Without further ado, today is Budzdarov Tavarish Stalin, his 143rd birthday. So, Budzdarov Tavarish Stalin. I wish I could play the song, but it'll get me a copyright strike on YouTube, and I don't want that. So you're just going to have to deal with it. So a friend of mine, when I was feeling really sad a few months ago, he sent me this like Stalin picture to cheer me up. And he sent me this poem, which he has all the words to it, except I have trouble with there's no way I'm going to even try with the Yiddish. So the last line is in Russian, or maybe that's also Yiddish, where it says Budzdarov Tavarish Stalin, which means have a drink to Comrade Stalin. So, well, and just for those who don't know the history of this, what happened was that it was on May 26th of 1945, after the Russian people went in and planted the red flag in Berlin and victimized all the Nazis. Basically, Stalin made a speech where he thanked all the Russian people for defeating the Nazis, and he said, "Have a drink to you, Russian people." And apparently this is like a imaginary response by some of the Russian people to Comrade Stalin, where they're like, "Well, thank you for helping us defeat the Nazis. Budzdarov." Anyways, so today Uncle Joe turns 143. It's kind of funny because I've mentioned this in the show before, but he was born Yusuf Vasirovich Jugashvili. But if you can't remember his last name, neither could have Lenin in 1915. Lenin sends this letter. He's like, "It's very important. I have a huge favor. There's this guy named Kobe, Joseph. It starts with what's his? Please tell me what his last name is. Very important. We forgot, the socialist we, of course." So I thought that was a cute story. Anyways, today is a very cool day because we have Yuri, who's going to come and talk. And basically, how many of you have taken Econ 101? I think a lot of you probably had to take it in college, where you learn a whole bunch. It's called capitalist indoctrination. And they teach you about some really dumb things like the law of marginal diminishing returns or something stupid like that. Well, we all know that the funny thing is that Lenin debunked this about in 1901. And then the theory of rent, Lenin also debunks this in 1901. But they're still going to teach you this in econ indoctrination because, well, you have to be indoctrinated to capitalism. So and it's a long episode. So without further ado, we're going to put that episode, which we pre-recorded, and afterwards I'll be back to read the London years of Nadezhda. I cannot pronounce that word. Reminiscences. I need to somebody teach me how to pronounce that word. Janet. Nadezhda Reminent. I can't. I just totally can't. Reminiscences. Привет, everyone, and welcome to another night of Late Nights with Lenin. Okay, so today I'm so excited because I tried one of the braid tutorials and I actually ended up making the braid. So cool. Exciting. Today we have Communist Garfield, who will come and talk to us about agriculture. Actually, it's really exciting because most people don't understand where their food comes from, unless, of course, you've read historically.substack.com, where we talk about the tragedy of private property. I'll just call you Yuri.
Yuri. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Yuri.
Yeah.
So do tell us, so I know that you have a degree in some kind of biomedical sciences. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So, do you want to so which one do you want to read? The Development of Capitalism in Russia, or Lenin's agriculture plan, or the 1907 agriculture plan?
We could do an agriculture one. That seems interesting. I don't think you've done that before.
Okay. Well, you're here to talk about agriculture, so I just wanted to see. So, okay, back in character. So Yuri,
Yes.
so I know you wanted to come and talk to us about agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So what is some of the things that people need to know besides the fact that Monsanto ends up what is Monsanto? Owning everything they eat?
Oh, yeah. Well, you can look at it from a lot of different angles. Some of it, you can look at it, if you look at it from a corporate analysis kind of framework, you can see a lot of patent trolling going on and a lot of companies doing stuff like having monopoly control of a pesticide, having monopoly control of a seed stock, performing genetic manipulations to that seed stock to make it, respond, like the famous Roundup Ready crops specifically to some company's pesticide that it's produced itself. You can, physically buy up all of the land. Like you see Bill Gates doing that right now. He's now one of the largest private landowners for farming in the United States. In the same vein, more historically, there was stuff like the Green Revolution, where even for further increased use of chemical pesticides was used to increase food yields all over the world, and to, sort of as an entry point for the corporatization of agriculture. You can look at it from the more socio-political viewpoint of where does my food comes from, who grows my food, how are they treated, what's their class character, what country are they from.
Is it usually some kind of slave from Central or South America?
Yeah, it runs a gradient from all the way slavery to that's kind of slavery over there. A lot of go ahead.
Oh no, I remember reading an article about Pierre Omidyar's pistachio slaves. Well, which we'll put in the link in the description. But yeah, it was pretty very slave-like.
Yeah, slave-like conditions, artisanal slave-like conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they do with miners too. They're artisanal cobalt miners, and then you have to be no, that means that they're not unionized and it's probably a child slave. Don't get fooled by artisanal. So since we have a big piece to read,
sure.
Let's get started. But the weird thing is that we're going to be asymmetrical, because I don't have anything to read it with, so I'll just listen to you.
Sure.
It's called The Agrarian Question and the Critiques of Marx, but the problem is that I'm just going to have to listen to you. And they're probably going to require, he probably is going to talk a lot about figures. And what we're going to do is that when he, if he lists off a table, don't read the table, just, we'll just put it up.
Sure. So,
and it depends on how much time you have. So if you have an infinite amount of time, we can start with chapter 1. But if you don't, the most important chapter, I'd say, is chapter 3.
Yeah, I don't really have anything going on. I work.
Okay. So let's start with chapter 1.
Sure.
And Ruskaya Bogatstvo means Russian wealth.
Ruskaya Bogatstvo.
Okay. Yeah, that's the newspaper he's making fun of. Okay.
Okay, and please correct me when I butcher the Russian
Oh,
pronunciation.
no, just let me do the Russian if you want. Viktor Chernov. Okay.
Okay.
I forgot to charge my iPad. Let's see, maybe I didn't, but I probably did.
Okay.
Yes, I totally forgot to charge my iPad. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to have this read to me like a bedtime story.
Okay, it's a pretty long bedtime story. All right.
You know that actually I secretly this is what I do. Like I have some Androids. If you put it in disability mode, you can have like a text to voice thing, and I always download like an Australian accent until I knew that Lenin spoke English with an Irish accent, and now I download an Irish accent, and then I just upload like about 90. Like I have about 90 different works of Lenin, and I just put it on loop, and I do that just like right, and that's how I fall asleep. Secretly, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
Okay. The agrarian question and the critics of Marx.
Mm-hmm.
To argue that dogmatic Marxism has been jolted from its position in the sphere of the agrarian questions would be like forcing an open door. So Russkaya Bogatstvo last year through the mouth.
Spoke.
What?
So spoke. Lenin's quoting from
spoke. Yeah. So spoke Russkaya Bogatstvo last year through the mouth of Viktor Chernov. Mm-hmm. What a peculiar quality this dogmatic Marxism possesses. For many years now, scientists and very learned people in Europe have been gravely declaring, and newspapers, scribes, and journalists have been repeating it over and over again, that Marxism has been jolted from its positions by criticism. And yet every new critic starts from the beginning all over again. To bombard these allegedly destroyed positions. Mr. Chernov, for example, in the periodical Russkaya Bogatstvo, as well.
Which means as Russian wealth, of course.
Yes,
just so you understand how pretentious that journal is.
In the periodical The Economist or some shit.
This is worse than The Economist. It literally is Russian wealth. So it's like one above Economist.
In the Financial Times.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Hold on.
Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mr. Chernov, for example, in the periodical Russkaya Bogatstvo, or Russian Wealth, as well as in the collection At the Glorious Post and in 240-page long discussion of Hart's work with his reader, forces an open door. Mm-hmm. Hart's work, which has been given such a lengthy exposition, is itself a review of Kautsky's book and has been translated into Russian.
And this is before Lenin started to hate Kautsky. So you'll see the evolution of the Kautsky hate. So this is pre-Kautsky hate.
But when he still thinks something of Kautsky?
No, where he doesn't hate him and has to write 4 books about why Kautsky sucks. Like this piece is not about how Kautsky sucks, even though Kautsky's mentioned.
Okay. Mr. Bulgakov, in keeping with his promise to refute this very same Kautsky, has published a whole 2-volume study. Now, surely no one will ever be able to find the remnants of dogmatic Marxism, which lies crushed to death between this mountain of critical printed matter.
He's being sarcastic.
Yeah, he talks like really long form shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Part 1. The law of diminishing returns. And the law is, of course, in square code.
Oh, by the way, you'd be surprised at how many modern economics 101 schools teach this stupid law about, and Lenin debunks this, but in Econ 101, you'd be shocked. Almost every American university, I bet you, teaches this stupid law.
Oh, yeah. I had it in my AP economics.
Okay. So go ahead.
The law of diminishing returns, or as they called it, the law of diminishing marginal returns.
Or something like that. Yeah. And it's and Lenin's debunked it in 1901 or 1905. I forgot which one this is. But 1900. Oh my God. So Yeah, it's like Jesus Christ in teaching old stuff to kids.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
The law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns. Let us first of all examine the law. All right, we've rubbed that into the ground. Let us first of all examine the general theoretical physiognomy of the critics, Mr. Bulgakov.
Hold on, what does physiognomy mean?
That's an old-timey science word for like science racism. Like the people who measured heads with calipers, like they were into physiognomy.
Oh, like fake science.
Yeah, like pseudoscience, but like fake. And let's see. Yeah, it really comes out of the eugenics and the phrenology movement. Those people. Oh my God, I could talk for an hour about those people.
Like, okay. In that case, I'm gonna have you on historically to talk. I've actually had people request me to do some episode on eugenics, so I'm gonna have you on historically too. Then.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can prepare for that. That'll be wonderful. That's one of my hobbies is like trolling scientific racists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The law of diminishing returns. First of all, let us first of all examine the general theoretical physiognomy of the critics. Mr. Bulgakov published an article in the periodical Nachalo. What is Nachalo?
Nachalo means let's start.
Nachalo criticized Kautsky's agrarian question, in which he had once exposed his stock critical methods. He charged down on Kautsky with the dash and abandoned of a veritable cavalier and scattered him to the winds.
Scattered.
Yes, scattered him to the winds. He put into Kautsky's mouth what he had not said. He accused him of ignoring the very circumstances and arguments which he, Kautsky, had expounded on with precision, and he presented to the reader as his own the critical conclusions drawn by Kautsky.
Oh my God, look at this. Like, it's so weird, like seeing Lenin actually defend Kautsky. Oh my God.
This guy must be a really big asshole, Mr. Bulgakov.
Well, no, this is still in 1901. So,
yeah.
Of course, he is a big dickhead if he's writing for Russian wealth.
Or, yeah. Or the Financial Times or whatever.
Yeah.
Where did I leave off? And scattered him to the winds. He put into Kautsky's mouth words which he had not said. He accused him of ignoring the very circumstances and arguments which he, Kautsky, had expounded with precision, and he presented to the reader as his own. Sorry, I messed that up. And a little bit dyslexic. That makes it hard to read out loud sometimes. One more time. He put into Kautsky's mouth words that he had not said. He accused him of ignoring the very circumstances and arguments which he, Kautsky, had expounded with precision, and he presented to the reader as his own the critical conclusions drawn by Kautsky. With the air of an expert, Mr. Bulgakov accused Kautsky of confounding technology with economics, and in so doing betrayed not only confusion, but also a disinclination to read to the end of the page. He quotes. Where have we seen that before?
Yes, reading till the end. Oh my God, like this is like...
Yeah, like when,
like every tweet, it's like, I've had yesterday some guy was like trying to nuance cook something, and I'm like, have you tried reading that thing you're linking me to?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Whenever anyone quotes Marx like really, really out of context, like the vouchers, the hases, like all of the people, the Maupins, like they.
Yeah.
Always like, oh, if you look at him right here, but if you read the paragraph before it, and if you read the next paragraph, it's clear that he means something other than what you are saying.
Exactly.
Scattered him to the winds. Needless to say, this article from the pen of the future professor is outworn jibes and socialists against the theory of collapse, against utopianism, against belief in miracles, etc. Now, in his doctoral thesis, Capitalism and Agricultural, St. Petersburg, 1900, Mr. Bulgakov settled all his accounts with Marxism and brought all his critical evolution to its logical conclusion.
Oh my God, imagine if like Lenin, oh my God, if I were doing a PhD, my doctoral, like if I were ever getting a PhD, oh my God, I'd be so scared to have Lenin troll it. Oh my God.
He would eviscerate you as a person.
I know, like I would. Oh my God. I can name. Oh, okay, so anyways, we'll have to look up what happened to Mr. Bulgakov afterwards, after Lenin.
I wonder if he became a collaborator, probably,
or if he just fell off the deep end and God knows. Okay, we'll look at him up. Okay, go on.
Mr. Bulgakov makes the law of diminishing returns the cornerstone of his theory of agrarian development. We are treated to quotations from the works of the classics who established this law. According to which each additional investment of labor and capital in land produces not a corresponding, but a diminishing quantity of product.
Okay, so this is let me just explain it. The way they teach you in economics is Econ 101 is that if you have 50 acres of land, you'll grow I don't know, whatever potatoes you have. But then at the 51st acre, you'll magically not. Yeah. It's stupid. And
the potatoes will lose efficiency.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. It makes sense until you think about it. Which is most of econ, 101.
Bourgeoisie economics, yeah.
All right, where did I leave off?
We are given a list.
Given a list. Quotations of the classics that established the law. We are given a list, and the English economists. We are given a list, and the English economists who recognize this law.
I think they mean we are given a list of these English economists.
These are the Paul Krugmans, which say what I'm saying is true. They're the British Paul Krugmans.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Or anyone in the London School of Economics. Oh my God. We'll talk about the story of the London School econ professor who blocked all of us after he said something stupid about Marx. But let's go on.
And the English economists who recognize this law. We are assured that it has universal significance, that it is an evident and absolutely undeniable truth, which only needs to be stated clearly, etc., etc. The more emphatically Mr. Bulgakov expresses himself, the clearer it becomes that he is retreating to the bourgeois political economy, which obscures social relationships by imaginary eternal laws.
Yeah, exactly. Obscure social relationships. That's it, with imaginary eternal laws. Exactly. That's all of econ in a Western country.
When you remove all of the variables you don't want to think about and make it a linear regression equation, and then ignore the R value, then you can say.
And then sometimes they just pull those variables out of thin air. Oh my God, did you see this political science professor or somebody who's this is the first time since Janet, if you find that tweet, can you please put it up, where he says, this is the first time since 1944, racism has been over 500.
500 racism.
I know. I'm what is the unit of measure? How do you measure this racism?
Well, they were measuring it in microaggressions, but now they moved on to nanoaggressions.
Or maybe they're measuring it in microcrackers. I don't know.
Yeah, microcrackers.
But the funniest thing is and he actually studied in Columbia, and he's a serious professional of whatever crap, and he's talking about 500 racism units.
500 racisms.
Okay, let's continue.
Yeah, they really love to just make it a very simple non-representational model.
Basically, half the time they just make up if you were to actually just take a pen and paper and just literally sum up their numbers, half the time it's just, you'll realize it's crap.
Yeah. What is it? The YouTuber, I don't normally watch all of his stuff, but he's the Luna Oi's husband, what's his name? That guy. He has a good video on
Emerson?
liberalism. Yeah, and he basically just talks about all of the economists who were, doing the same thing, like just insisting that it's true, and like, going back to all these other economists who insisted it was true.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's continue.
Indeed, what does the evidentness of the notorious law of diminishing returns amount to? If each successive investment of labor and capital and land produced not a diminishing but an equal quantity of products, there would be no sense in extending the land area under which cultivation, the land area under cultivation. Additional quantities of grain would be produced on the same plot of land. What the fuck?
If each successive produced, this is their logic. Okay. If each successive investment of produced not a, but
you would just have more people farming the same land, and therefore they would make more wheats.
No. Okay. Yes. Okay. Let's go. Continue.
Evidentness. Additional quantities of grain would be produced on the same plot of land, however small, and it would be possible to carry on the agriculture of the whole globe on 1 desatine of land. This is the customary and the only argument advanced in favor of this universal law.
I bet you, like, if any of you are taking Econ 101, go open your book, and I bet you they use the same exact thing, but they may change, like, land to pizzas or something like that. Or milk or cows, but it'll be exact.
If we just have enough technology, we can grow all of the food on one land.
Yeah. You'll see. Open your econ book though. And Lenin's debunked this in 1901. Okay. Or 100. Okay. Let's continue. 1901.
It's all going to be on 1 desatine. A desatine is what? It's like an acre.
A little over an acre. It was like some unit of measure in Tsarist Russia. So it's bigger than an acre.
On 1 desatine of land. That is the customary and the only argument advanced in favor of this universal law. A little thought, however, will prove to anyone that this argument is an empty abstraction, which ignores the most important thing, the level of technological development, the state and the productive forces. I guess of the state and the productive forces.
No. The state and the state of the
productive forces.
Like not the state as in state, but like the position or how the situation that
their development.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Of technological development, the state of the productive forces. Indeed, the very term additional or successive investments of labor and capital presupposes changes in the methods of production, reforms in technique. In order to increase the quantity of capital invested in the land to any considerable degree, new machinery must be invented, and there must be new methods of land cultivation, stock breeding, transport of products, and so on and so forth. Of course, additional investments of labor and capital may and do take place on a relatively small scale, even when the technique of production has remained at the same level.
Usually that means they just buy more land and have more slaves on that land. If the technology is not improved, like the additional investment of capital means you are going to buy more land and have more slaves working on that land.
At the same level of division. In such cases, the law of diminishing returns is applicable to a certain degree, i.e., in the sense that the unchanged technique of production imposes relatively very narrow limits upon the investment of additional labor and capital.
Okay, Lenin says the same thing, but much nicer, of course, than me. Okay.
Labor and capital. Consequently, instead of a universal law, we have an extremely relative law. So relative indeed that it cannot be called a law or even a cardinal specific feature of agriculture. Let us take for granted the 3-field system cultivation of traditional grain crops, maintenance of cattle to obtain manure, lack of improved grassland implements, Obviously, assuming that these conditions remain unchanged, the possibility of investing additional labor and capital in the land are extremely limited. But within the narrow limits in which some investment of additional labor and capital is still possible, a decrease in the productivity of each such additional investment will not always and not necessarily be observed. Let us take industry, flour milling or ironworking, for example. In the period preceding world trade and the invention of the steam engine, at that level of technical development, the limits to which additional labor and capital could be invested in a blacksmith's forge or in a wind or water mill were restricted. The inevitable thing that happened was that small smithies and flour mills continued to multiply and increase in number until the radical changes in the new methods of production created a basis for new forms of industry. Thus, the law of diminishing returns does not apply to cases in which technology is progressing and methods of production are changing. It has only an extremely relative and restricted application to the conditions in which the technology remains unchanged. That is why neither Marx nor the Marxists speak of this law. And only representatives of the bourgeois science like Brentano make so much noise about it, since they are unable to abandon the prejudices of the old political economy with its abstract, eternal, and natural laws. Do you know who Brentano is?
No, and I can't really Google it because my camera's battery is something. I think I need to go get a new battery, and I don't have my iPad charged. So I will just text me and bug me right after this, and then I will totally do it.
Sure. All right. Natural laws. Mr. Bulgakov defends the universal
Bulgakov.
Bulgakov. I've been saying Bulgakov.
That's another one. That's the one where he and that's my favorite one where he's like, Lenin's like, okay, this is in Russian and this is in English. He's like, что это значит? Только Allah ведает. It means, what does this mean? Only Allah can figure it out. It's like so funny, but yeah, that's another guy.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, go ahead.
He's funny in multiple contexts.
Yeah.
Mr. Bulgakov defends the universal law arguments by
No.
by arguments deserving only of ridicule.
Deserving only ridicule. Yeah. This is the okay. Your tweet only deserves replies of ridicule.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What was formerly a free gift of nature must now be produced by man. This is quoting
Bulgakov.
Yes. The wind and the rain broke up the soil, which was full of nutritive elements, and only a little effort on the part of the man was required to produce what was needed. In the course of time, a larger and larger share of the productive work fell to man. As is the case everywhere, artificial processes more and more take the place of natural processes. But while in industry this expresses man's victory over nature, in agriculture it indicates the increasing difficulties of an existence for which nature is diminishing.
Okay, hold on. No, because back in the olden days, like that's why when humans started, I think it took them like nearly like 1 million years to figure out how to farm, because you kind of had to like dig really deep and like put like a lot of seeds inside so that you can be sure that some of them will spurt.
And like every modern fruit or vegetable that we have is the product of immense and aggressive breeding. Like when you started out with corn, it was like one little niblet of corn. Like he's just so full of shit, like from a historical and scientific perspective too.
Yeah, and actually, I did not know this, but we had an anthropologist, which will air soon, which we pre-recorded. But almonds used to be poisonous until humans, like somebody in Jordan, like about 40,000 years ago was like, hey, I'm bored. Let me figure out how to make them unpoisonous. Like, I don't know why he did it, but yeah, why they did it or what happened. But yeah.
Yeah, but you can. It's amazing the things you can do. You can just like breed out like I don't know whatever
poison from cyanide.
Yeah, the amount of it that it produces, you can totally control that. Yeah, he's
in
talking about.
In the present case, this is still Bulgakov.
This is still him. Okay, he's still quoting from the same work.
Mm-hmm. In the present case.
In the present case, it is immaterial whether the increasing difficulty of producing food is expressed in an increase in human labor or in an increase of its products, such as instruments of production, fertilizers. Mr. Bulgakov wishes to say that it is immaterial whether the increasing difficulty of producing food finds expression in an increased expenditure of human labor or an increase in the products of human labor.
Okay. He's saying it is immaterial whether or not. He should totally be, like, I want to send him to, like, I want to go back in time and turn him into a serf and make him work as a serf in Tsarist Russia.
We're just gonna have one serf, but he's gonna have like thousands and thousands of shovels, and it'll be the same as if we had like some serfs and some shovels.
Exactly. Jesus Christ! You can tell he's not a serf, and this is, and any peasant in Tsarist Russia, if you were to read this to them, they'd totally laugh at like this out. Like, yeah, okay.
Agriculture is when you take two serfs and you rub them together until food falls out. That's probably about his level of understanding.
That's why most Americans' level of understanding, I bet you.
Oh yeah, people don't know where their food comes from or like any of the things that are going wrong with it.
I would not have known if I hadn't read so much Lenin, actually.
Really? I don't know. My parents were always hippies, so I got a little bit of the like, be conscious of everything. All right, so we're coming back from Lenin's correction of Bulgakov's attempt to discuss.
I would call it Lenin's quote tweet of Bogotov.
Lenin's quotation of Bogotov, where he
quote tweet. No, he does a quote tweet. See, he quotes and then tweets. And it
makes his correction to his like theory of labor value statement, which is incorrect.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's back to quoting a Bulgakov.
Okay, so returning to Bulgakov, what is important is that the food becomes more and more costly to man. This substitution of human labor for the forces of nature and the artificial factors of production for natural factors is the diminishing law of returns. Wow.
That is like the stupidest thing I've ever like, because in the wild they did not produce that much food. That's why like the population in the wild was like 10,000 people or something. Like there's a reason why we can have 7 billion or 4 billion or 1 billion. Well, I forgot how many people were back in the 1901. I think
1901.
1 billion probably. Okay. Okay. By the way, I don't. Okay, we don't have to. Okay, so. Mikhail, the guy he calls Tugan Baranovsky, he's going to quote, isn't like an economist from the National Academy of Sciences in Tsarist Ukraine. And then I think he becomes, he's like a cadet, and then he becomes a white, and then he dies in 1990. White army.
Yeah.
And then he dies in a heart attack to the Paris Peace Conference, which is kind of funny. Okay.
Okay, picking up from...
And we all know who Struve is, right? Pyotr Struve, which I keep saying, if you want to learn what's going to happen to AOC, look at Pyotr Struve. Okay, go ahead.
Russian AOC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, he's saying...
Evidently,
Mr. Bulgakov is envious of the laurels of Messrs. Struve and Tugan Baranovsky.
Baranovsky, but it's okay.
Tugan Baranovsky?
Yeah.
Tugan Baranovsky, Messrs. Struve and Tugan Baranovsky, who arrived at the same conclusion that it is not man who works with the help of machines, but machines that work with the help of man. I don't know that you could get into a whole systems theory thing. I think that stuff's actually
no. But that's immaterial. Okay, I'm gonna have to Google this in Russian so that I can see if he's funnier in Russian. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And like those critics, he sinks to the level of vulgar political economy by talking about the forces of nature being superseded by human labor and so forth. Speaking generally, it is as impossible for human labor to supersede the forces of nature as it is to substitute pounds for yards. Both in industry and in agriculture, man can only utilize the forces of nature when he has learned how they operate. And he can facilitate this utilization by means of machinery, tools, etc. That primitive man obtained all that he required as a free gift of nature is a silly fable, which Mr. Bulgakov would be howled down even by first-term students.
Maybe not, depending on what they teach at Harvard.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. God just left all of the corn seeds for us in the Garden of Eden, and then we inherited the earth. Right? Wait, I leave off again. First-term students. Our age was not preceded by a golden age, and a primitive man was absolutely crushed by the burden of existence, by the difficulties of the struggle against nature. The introduction of machinery and of improved methods of production immeasurably eased man's struggle against nature generally, and in the production of food in particular. It has not become more difficult to produce food. It has become more difficult for the workers to obtain it because the capitalist development has inflated ground rent and the price of land, has concentrated agriculture in the hands of small and large capitalists, and to a still larger extent has concentrated machinery, implements, and money, without which successful production is impossible.
And like I said, it's only gotten worse now that 100 years later, because instead of a hands of few, we can say Monsanto, basically. With machinery, there's, I think, 2 tractor companies, maybe one. Back then they probably didn't have tractors, but whatever.
Yeah, they didn't have these big, ridiculous combine harvesters with all these attachments and shit.
But
that's another area of monopolist obstruction and abuse.
Yeah. And then, okay. I'm trying to find the. Go ahead, continue.
Sure, implements production is impossible. To explain the aggravation of the worker's condition by the argument that nature is reducing her gifts can mean only that one has become a bourgeois apologist. Because it's a bunch of fucking nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. In accepting this law, continues Mr. Bulgakov, we do not in the least assert that there is a continuously increasing difficulty in food production, nor do we deny progress in agriculture. To assert the first and to deny the second would be contrary to obvious facts. This difficulty does not grow uninterruptedly, of course. Developments proceed in a zigzag fashion. Discoveries in agronomics and technical improvements convert barren into fertile land and temporarily remove the tendencies indicated by the law of diminishing returns.
And this is okay. So, like, in fact, Mr. Bulgakov kind of admits that the law of diminishing returns is nonsense.
Yeah, except for when it does this, and we actually cause all kinds of these environmental disruptions and converting fertile land into barren land. And that's another fun chapter.
That's another, that's another complicated thing. Yeah.
The Holodomor, the Dust Bowl, et cetera, et cetera.
That's for Stalin's collected works.
Collected works of Stalin. That would be a much shorter collection.
No. Stalin's collected work. Yeah, it's much shorter than Lenin's because Stalin is polite and doesn't waste his time trolling. And
he leaves out half of it where he's not just making fun of Kautsky.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, about 5,000 pieces that aren't there because Stalin is not obsessing over Kautsky.
Yeah, he's not writing to his critics.
Yeah.
Okay.
profound, is it not?
Profound, is it not? Technical progress is a temporary tendency, while the laws of diminishing returns, i.e., diminishing productivity, and that has not always been, and that has not always, translation thing.
Ben, okay, let me just look at the translation. Beach that has not always been the case, kind of thing.
Technological progress is a temporary tendency, while the law of diminishing returns, i.e., diminishing productivity, and that has not always been the case.
Da ne vasegda is what he said, Lenin said in the original Russian. And not always true.
Of additional investments of capital on the basis of unchanging technique has universal significance. This is equal to saying that the stopping of trains at the stations represents the universal law of transport, while the motion of trains between stations is merely a temporal tendency, paralyzing the operation of the universal law of mobility.
This is a good example. I'm going to steal. Oh my God, this is so funny.
Yeah, you should definitely clip that one.
This is so good. Oh my God. Okay. I'm going to have somebody read it in Russian for me. Okay.
Finally, the extensive data clearly universality of the law of diminishing return. Data on the agricultural as well as the non-agricultural population. Mr. Bulgakov admits that if each country were restricted to its own natural resources, the procuring of food would call for an uninterrupted relative increase. Note this.
This is Lenin's
quantity of labor and consequently in the agricultural population. Diminution.
And consequently in the agricultural population as in slaves.
Yeah, we would need more slaves if everyone had to make their own food.
Yeah, basically.
If only Lenin were so blunt, it would be like Stalin. It'd be very short.
Lenin, you can't be more. Len's pretty blunt. I mean,
yeah. If everyone had to make their own food, we would need more slaves.
Yeah, basically, that's what.
Diminution in the agricultural population of Western Europe, accordingly, is expanded by the fact.
Explained.
Explained. Is explained by the fact that the operation of the law of diminishing returns has been counteracted by the importation of grain
from India, basically more slaves in India, importation of grain from the colonies like Africa, India, South America, Western Europe. Yeah. So literally, it's more slaves. Slaves in faraway places means that less people have to work, be slaves here.
Yeah, we send our slaves to the colonies.
No. We've enslaved the colonies, so now we need less slaves here, so we can have more.
Now we can pay our slaves, or the local slaves, less money.
No. Opposite.
I know what you're saying. I'm just being silly.
No, don't confuse them because Americans are stupid enough as it is. We can't confuse them. No, okay. That means that the local people, they're going to be working in industry and they're going to be paid a little bit more so that they can go shoot slaves in Africa whenever it's needed.
Yeah, whenever they have to put down the next slave rebellion or whatever.
Yeah.
An excellent explanation indeed. Our pundit has forgotten a detail. Namely, that a relative diminution in the agricultural population, slaves, is common to all capitalist countries, both agricultural and grain importing. The agricultural population is relatively diminishing in America and in Russia. It has been diminishing in France since the end of the 18th century. See, he has a note. See figures in the same work, Mr. Bulgakov, volume 2. 168. I don't know if you want to put that in or not. Or if you can
I'll put the figures up. Okay.
Moreover, the relative diminution of the agricultural population sometimes becomes an absolute diminution, whereas the excess of grain imports over exports was still quite insignificant in the 30s and 40s.
1830s and 40s, yeah.
In the 1830s and 1840s, and only after 1878 do we cease to find years in which grain exports exceed grain imports. In Prussia, there was a relative diminution in the agricultural population from 73.5% in 1816 to 71.7% in 1849, and to 67.5% in 1871, whereas the importation of rye began only in the early 1860s.
Skip the citation.
Okay, and the importation in the early 70s. That's a long ass citation.
Finally.
Blah, 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 blah.
Finally?
Finally. Where is it?
Right after the citation.
Right after the citation. Okay. Sorry, I thought it was the whole paragraph. Finally, if we take the European grain importing countries, example gradia, France and Germany during the last decade, we shall find that there has been an undoubted progress in agricultural side. I'm going to just read that sentence again because I guess my mouth is rebelling against me. Finally, if we take the European grain importing countries, e.g. France and Germany during the last decade, we shall find that there has been an undoubted progress in the agriculture side by side with an absolute diminution in the number of workers engaged in farming. In France, this number dropped from 6,913,504 in 1882 to 6,663,135 in 1892. And in Germany,
it dropped so much because in France, they had Africa.
Yeah. So what's that? That's about 240,000 workers that they stopped, having locally produced, and slaves, colonial slaves instead of local slaves. And then in Germany, it only goes down by 20,000. In Germany,
because they didn't have Africa.
Yeah. Yet.
Yeah. Or.
Yeah.
They never. Yeah.
The Berlin Conference was right after that, right?
Okay, got it.
So yeah, Germany. And in Germany, from 8,064,000 to 8,045,000 in 1895. Thus, it may be said that the entire history of the 19th century, by a multitude of data on countries of the most advanced and varied character, proves irrefutably that this universal law of diminishing returns is absolutely paralyzed by the temporary tendency of technological advance, which enables a relatively and sometimes absolutely diminishing rural population to produce an increasing quantity of agricultural products for an increasing mass of population. God, he just has all these sick burns.
I know, and I love the quote tweets. Like in the middle, like Lenin puts these parentheses where they're literally like quote tweets of like stupid things that somebody else said. Yeah.
Incidentally, this massive statistical data also refutes the two following main points of Mr. Bulgakov's theory. First, his assertion that the theory that constant capital, implements and materials of production, grows more rapidly than variable capital, labor power, is absolutely inapplicable to agriculture. Which, yeah. Should we talk about labor theory of value, or just keep going?
Huh?
Should we explain the labor theory of value stuff, or just keep going?
It's up to you. We can do it at the end of this paragraph or now.
So like Marx says, like stuff is like dead labor, basically. Like if a chisel takes a bunch of hours to make, or some farming implements or a combine. Yeah, okay. Labor power is absolutely inapplicable to agriculture. With an air of importance, Mr. Bulgakov declares that this theory is wrong, and in proof of his opinion refers to A. Professor Skvortsov, celebrated mostly for having ascribed Marx's theory of the average. Sorry.
The average rate of profit.
The justification really threw me for a second. to Professor Skvortsov, celebrated for having ascribed Marx's theory of average rate of profit to ill-intentioned propaganda, and B, the fact that under intensive farming, the number of workers employed per unit of land increases. This is an example of the deliberate refusal to understand Marx, which fashionable critics constantly
And also, and this is 100% true 100 years later, it's like their inability to understand Marx has, they're not an inability, their deliberate refusal to understand Marx has just like gone whoosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's not even a refusal anymore. They're actually that stupid now. Like they're no longer ignoring him. They actually they're like, oh, reading Marx. Oh, that sounds so
complicated. Oh my God. There was this Harvard professor who may write for Jacobin, who was like, when complicated topics like Marx or Lenin come up, I dumb it down. And I'm like, what? You realize that people learned how to read by reading Marx, yeah. So you're saying that
less confusing than most economics is.
I know, but I'm a little scared that Harvard students are unable to cope with what illiterate peasants who are working 16 hours a day and who secretly learned how to read under the cover of night from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. They were able to handle it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like one of the things that Harvard does is intentionally provide a caricature of it so that people don't go oh, that guy's really smart, I should go read his book. They're and here's this intentionally bad, wrong version of Marx so that you don't get intellectually curious and accidentally read something that you shouldn't.
Yeah. Actually, Lenin has a later piece about caricatures of Marxist something.
Yeah. I remember one of the people who I don't talk to anymore, he got really mad at me and was like, well, how is the state just going to overthrow itself? And I'm like, I don't think that it's going to do that. Doesn't want to talk to me anymore. I'm like, and now I know that that's Trotskyism, right?
No. That's Noam Chomskyism, where you think okay, the state has an army, navy, nuclear weapons. It's not going to just spontaneously it's kind of expecting imagine if you were just throwing expecting random rocks to assemble itself into a bridge. That's not going to happen. You have to pour cement and yeah,
they're not, the army isn't just going to come and pick up Noam Chomsky in a fucking helicopter in the middle of the night and make him president in his little anarchist fantasy. Okay, okay, so he's talking about this professor who says more of this dumb shit.
Everything is always about this. No, he's Bulgakov is a future professor who okay, here, do you want me to read a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Finally, okay, let's see, where were we? Okay, I have ADHD, so I forgot.
Yeah, I do too. It's a bad combination.
Okay, found it. Okay. The fact that under intensive farming, the number of workers employed per unit of land increases. This is a deliberate refusal to understand Marx, which fashionable critics constantly display. Think of it. The theory of more rapid growth of constant capital as compared with variable capital, constant capital is machinery, variable capital is people, is refuted by the increase of variable capital per unit of land. Mr. Bulgakov fails to notice that the very statistics he himself offers in such abundance confirms Marxist theory. In German agriculture as a whole, number of workers employed diminished from 8,064,000 in 1882 to 8,045,000 in 1895. If the number of persons engaged in agriculture as a subsidiary occupation is added, it increased from 11,208,000 to 11,623,000, i.e. only by 3.7%. The same period, the livestock increased from 23 million to 25,400,000, all livestock expressed in terms of capital, i.e. by more than 10%. The number of cases in which the 5 most important agricultural machines were employed increased from 458,000 to 922,000, i.e. more than doubled. The quantity of fertilizers imported increased from 636,000 tons in 1883 to 1,961,000 tons in 1892. The quantity of potassium salts from 300,000 double
centimeters.
No. Okay, no, he means six. Doubles by six. Doubles 3 times or 6 times. 8 times. Sorry. Doubles by 8 times. Okay. No. 3. It's basically it's 8 times bigger. 2 to the power of 3 bigger than it used to be. Okay, which is 2,400,000. It is clear.
Yeah.
It is clear. It is not clear that from this that constant capital has increased in relation. Is it not clear that from this that constant capital has increased in relation to variable capital? This is quite apart from the fact that these summary figures to a great extent conceal the progress of large-scale production, which we shall deal with this point later. Secondly, the progress of agriculture simultaneously with the diminution or negligible absolute increase in the agricultural population completely refutes Mr. Bulgakov's absurd attempt to revive Malthusianism. Mm-hmm. The first of the Russian ex-Marxists to make this attempt was probably Mr. Pyotr Strov. In his critical remarks, but he, as always, never went beyond hesitant, half-expressed and ambiguous remarks, which he did not carry to their logical conclusion or round off into a complete system of views. Mr. Bulgakov, however, is bolder and more consistent. He unhesitatingly converts the law of diminishing returns into one of the most important laws of the history of civilization. The entire history of the 19th century with its problems of riches and poverty would be unintelligible without this law. I have not the least doubt that the social question as it is posed today is materially linked with this law. Our strict scientist hastens to make this declaration on page 18 of his inquiry, in quotations. There is no doubt, he declares at the end of his work, that overpopulation exists and a certain part of the poverty that prevails must be put under the heading of absolute poverty. Oh my God, the World Bank hasn't even changed. Okay. The poverty of production and not of distribution. The population problem in the special form in which it presents itself to us as a result of the conditions of agricultural production is, in my opinion, the principal obstacle at the present time, at any rate, in a way of any extensive application of the principles of collectivism or cooperation in agricultural enterprise. The past leaves to the future a heritage in the shape of a grain problem more terrible and more difficult than the social problem. The problem of production, not distribution, and so on and so forth, which is exactly 100% opposite because, and Lenin's right. There is no need for us to discuss the scientific significance of this theory, which is inseparably connected with the universal law of diminishing returns, since we have already examined this law. The fact that critical flirtation with Malthusianism in its logical development has inevitably resulted in a descent to the most vulgar bourgeoisie apologetics is proved by the above quoted arguments, which Mr. Bulgakov has presented with a frankness that leaves nothing to be desired.
And the Malthusian stuff is just like the overpopulation myths, like the idea that we don't have enough land to feed all those people, like.
And we realized that's not true because whatever the population in 1900 is, the population now is 7 billion. And we still have we have more food. We have way more food. It's like literally the problem is distribution. We're growing so much food, like we can feed like another 10 million people. Distribution is the problem because Monsanto doesn't. It hurts Monsanto.
Well, distribution, like destruction of food, like the profit motive, it's all kind of like all wadded up together.
Yeah, basically it's because of Monsanto.
Yeah, they suck. They really do.
Okay.
Oh, and they're like the original the IG Farben like tendril tentacle goes into agriculture.
No. Monsanto was not.
Well, yeah, but they've been purchased.
Okay, Bayer started Bayer, but they merged with, like, Monsanto was the original Agent Orange people and Bayer like merged with, like, literally the most evil people. Like, I can't even tell you how evil the merger of Bayer.
Two different flavors of war criminals.
No, I mean, IG Farben literally did the Holocaust. Oh my God. I have to put up this tweet. I put this up in this article, but it shocked me so much when BASF was like, today on Holocaust Remembrance Day, we remember. And it's like, yes, of course we remember. You were there doing it.
We remember how much money we made selling plastic trays to the fucking Third Reich.
And we remember how many people like collecting all the gold after we put people in gas chamber. Of course you remember. You were there doing it. Okay, let's continue. And okay, can you read now?
Sure, I can read now. Oh man. Yeah, that's some really, really high power hypocrisy. In a further essay, we shall examine data from several news sources cited by our critics who constantly din into our ears that the orthodox Marxists fear specification and show that Mr. Bulgakov generally stereotypes the world overpopulation, the use of which relieves him of the necessity of making any kind of analysis, particularly of analyzing the class antagonisms present among the peasantry.
Well, no, but the overpopulation is a little bit more dangerous, and a little bit in the future when they do get enough agricultural machinery, and then instead of like cutting profits, they decide to do the Hitler method. I mean, fascism is a lot. Subscribes a lot to those like Malthusian things. But anyways.
Oh yeah, they definitely got to get rid of the bad people, not the extra people, but the bad people. But it's like, yeah, it's the
same thing. Extra people, bad people. I mean, they get rid of the bad people are the extra people, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here we shall confine ourselves to the general theoretical aspect of the agrarian question and touch on the theory of rent. As for Marx, writes Mr. Bulgakov, we must say that in Volume 3 of Capital, modern Paul Krugmans haven't even read Capital.
Okay, so at least Bulgakov is a little bit better off than modern day bourgeois. Oh my God, they're full of crap. Like, I can't even tell you. Okay.
Yeah.
All of it is just like crap.
Yeah. Okay. We must say that in Volume 3 of Capital, in the form in which we have it now, he adds nothing worthy of attention to Ricardo's theory of differential rent. This is Bulgakov speaking. Let us bear this nothing worthy of attention in mind and compare the critic's verdict with the following statement made by him previously. Notwithstanding his obvious opposition to this law, the law of diminishing returns, Marx reciprocates in its fundamental principles Ricardo's theory of rent, which is based on the law. Thus, according to Mr. Bulgakov, Marx failed to see the connection between Ricardo's theory of rent and the law of diminishing returns, and therefore he never carried his argument to its logical conclusion.
Oh, this is so funny. The Marx failed to see me still was alive 100 years ago. Okay.
In regard to such a statement, we can say but one thing, that no one distorts Marx to the degree that the ex-Marxists do, and that no one is so incredibly unabashed in ascribing to the writer he is criticizing 1,001 mortal sins.
Projection. That's what Lenin's talking about.
Yeah. It's a little bit harder to deal with the people who've actually read your books, because then you have to look at them instead of just telling them out of hand. They're full of shit. Mr. Bulgakov's assertion is a glaring distortion of the truth. Actually, Marx not only saw the connection between Ricardo's theory of rent and his erroneous doctrine of diminishing returns, but quite definitely exposed Ricardo's error. Anyone who has read Volume 3 of Capital with even a grain of attention could not but have observed the fact, very much worthy of attention, that it was precisely Marx who freed the theory of differential rent from all connection with the notorious law of diminishing returns. Marx demonstrated that the unequal productivity of different investments of capital and in land was necessary for the formation of differential rent. The question as to whether the transition is from better land to worse land or vice versa, as to whether the productivity of the additional investments of capital in the land diminishes or increases, is absolutely immaterial. In actual practice, all sorts of combinations of these varying cases take place, and it is utterly impossible to subject these combinations to a single general rule. For example, Marx first of all describes the first form of differential rent, which arises from the unequal productivity of capital invested in unequal plots of land, and he explains his case by tables. Let's see, how long is that? Ooh, that's a really long parenthesis.
Okay. Tables. Okay, let me read. Okay. Concerning which Mr. Bulgakov severely rebukes Marx for his excessive predilection for clothing what are often very simple thoughts in a complete mathematical garb. Oh my God, this is exactly what Chomsky accuses Marx of doing too. Okay, this is complicated mathematical garb is simply 4 rules of arithmetic. And the very simple ideas, as we see, were completely misunderstood by our learned professor. Go on.
After analyzing these tables, Marx draws the conclusion, this takes care of the first false assumption regarding the differential rent still found amongst the West, Malthus and Ricardo, namely that it necessarily presupposes a movement towards worse and worse soil, or an ever-decreasing fertility of the soil. It can be formed, as we have seen, with a movement towards better soil. It can be formed,
I'm here.
It can be formed when a better soil takes the lowest position that was formerly occupied by the worst soil. It can be connected with a progressive improvement in agriculture. The precondition is merely in the equality of different kinds of soil. Marx does not speak here of the unequal productivity of successive investments of capital and land, because this gives rise to the second form of differential rent. In this chapter, he speaks only of the first form of differential rent. So far as the increase in the productivity is concerned, it is differential rent. I assume that the increase in absolute fertility of the total area does not eliminate this inequality, but either increases it, leaves it unchanged, or merely reduces it. Mr. Bulgakov failed to see the radical difference between Marx's theory of differential rent and Ricardo's theory of rent. He preferred to rummage in volume 3 of Capital for a fragment which could rather suggest the idea that Marx was by no means opposed to the law of diminishing returns.
Exactly what Lowell. Okay, this is funny.
Yeah, he's mining quotes again.
Yeah.
We apologize to the reader for having to devote so much space to a passage that is quite immaterial to the question that concerns us and Mr. Bulgakov. But what can one do when the heroes of modern criticism, who have the insolence to charge orthodox Marxists with resorting to rabulous disputation? I haven't heard rabulous before.
I don't know what rabulous means either.
Like a rabble, I would guess. Like,
no.
Disorderly.
Let's look it up. Jenna, can you look it up if you're around? Not high.
Rabulous. And I'm
okay. Rabulous. Oh, it auto-corrected to fabulous.
Yes, it did the same thing for me.
Okay, rabulous. It's still auto-corrected to fabulous.
I'm seeing it in like the Wiktionary as being a form of rad and fabulous together.
Yeah.
What?
Like that's what's coming up. The rabulous word is rabble.
Oh my God! So Lenin's like
well, it's not a real word. Like
Okay. Wait. In that case, do I need to look up the Russian? I'm too tired.
No. I found that the translated word, it's rabulism, a tendency to railing and quibbling, rabulistic, rabulous.
Okay, perfect.
So, yeah. Rabulous. Even translated, he's quite spicy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where is rabulous?
Distort the absolute. Distort, let me read till the end of the paragraph. Distort the absolutely clear meaning of a doctrine to which they are opposed by quoting passages out of context and in faulty translations. Lord,
Okay.
that's exactly what I mean.
That's what he's literally doing.
Yeah. No. That's literally what they still do. Like with Putin, like I have yet to see them like properly translate Putin. Like he's always mistranslated. Ahmadinejad. Oh my God. Okay, let's continue.
Oh yeah, they do that. Like all the death to America. We must destroy Israel. Like all that shit. They're just like.
Oh yeah. It's like totally
less charitable.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Bulgakov quotes from the passage that he found as follows. From the standpoint of a capitalist mode of production, a relative increase in the price of agricultural products always takes place, since
quote tweet Lenin again.
Ask the reader to pay particular attention to the words "we" have italicized. These products cannot be secured unless an expenditure is incurred, a payment made which was not previously made.
Okay.
Marx goes on to say that the elements of nature entering as agents into production, costing nothing, represent a free gift of nature's productive power of labor. But if for the production of an additional product it is necessary to work without the help of this natural power, a new capital outlay is required, which leads to an increase in the cost of production. Yeah.
Concerning this mode of quoting, we have three remarks to make. First, Mr. Bulgakov himself introduced the word since, which gives his tirade the definite sense of establishing some kind of law. In the original Das Kapital, Marx does not say since, but when. When something is paid for which formerly did not have to be paid for, there is a relative increase in the price of the product. Is that proposition in anything like the recognition of a law of diminishing returns? Secondly, Mr. Bulgakov inserts in parentheses the word agricultural. In the original text, the word does not appear at all. In all probability, with the frivolousness characteristics of the critics, Mr. Bulgakov decided that in this passage, Marx could be speaking only of agricultural products and therefore hastened to give his readers an explanation that this is a complete misrepresentation. The point, in fact, Marx in this passage speaks of products in general. In the original, the passage quoted by Mr. Bulgakov is preceded by the words, but in general, the following is to be noted. Freely bestowed natural forces may enter into industrial production. The same section on rent, Marx gives examples of a waterfall for which a certain factory takes place of steam power. And this is the factory in Liverpool, or Manchester. Ingalls talks about this. And if it is necessary to manufacture an additional quantity of products without the aid of this freely bestowed natural forces, there will always be a relative increase in the price of products. Thirdly, we must examine the context in which this passage occurs. Marx discusses this in this chapter, Differential Rent Obtained from the Worst Cultivated Soil, and he examines, as always, two absolutely equal possible cases. The first case, increasing productivity of successive investments, and the second case, decreasing productivity of such investments. But in regards to the second of the possible cases, Marx says, concerning decreasing the productiveness of the soil with successive investments in capital, see Liebig, but in general, it is following is to be noted, our italics. Therefore, the passage translated by Mr. Bulgakov, stating that when what was formerly obtained gratis has now to be paid for, there is always an increase in the relative price of the product. We shall leave it to the reader to judge the scientific consciousness of the critic who turned Marx's remark about one possible cases into a recognition of this case by Marx as some sort of general law.
Okay. And the following is the conclusion at which Mr. Bulgakov arrives concerning the passage he has discovered. This passage, of course, is vague. Of course. By substituting one word for another, Mr. Bulgakov has rendered it utterly meaningless. But it cannot be understood otherwise than an indirect or even a direct recognition. Listen well. I, of the law of diminishing returns, I am unaware that Marx has expressed himself openly on the latter in the other place. I, 114. As an ex-Marxist, Mr. Bulgakov is unaware that Marx openly declared the assumptions of the West, Malthus and Ricardo, that differential rent presupposes a transition to worse land or diminishing returns, to be utterly false. He is unaware. In the course of his voluminous analysis of rent, Marx points out scores of times that he regards diminishing and increasing productivity of additional investments of capital equally possible in both cases.
Yep.
Because it could just go either way.
Wow. Yeah, this actually took much longer than, what time do you have to work tomorrow?
2 p.m.
Oh, okay. Let me get a snack and shall we go to the theory of rent then?
Sure. The theory of rent. Mr. Bulgakov has completely failed to understand Marx's theory of rent. He is convinced that he has shattered this theory by the two following arguments. One, according to Marx, agricultural capital enters into equalization of the rate of profit so that rent is created by a surplus profit that exceeds the average rate of profit. Mr. Bulgakov considers this to be false. Because the monopoly of land ownership eliminates free competition, which is necessary for the process of equalizing the rate of profit. Agricultural capital does not enter the process of equalizing the rate of profit. 2, absolute rent is merely a special case of differential rent, and it is erroneous to distinguish the one from the other. The distinction is based upon a completely arbitrary twofold interpretation of one and the same fact, namely the monopoly ownership of the factors of production.
What are the factors of production? Oh, God.
Oh, the factors of production.
One of the factors.
One of the factors of production. The monopoly ownership of one of the factors of production. Mr. Bulgakov is so convinced of the crushing effect of his argument that he cannot refrain from pouring forth a stream of vehement words against Marx, such as petito principi, an argument based on the conclusion from a proposition which still has to be proved.
That's a circular argument, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. An argument based on the conclusion, but still has to be proved. Non-Marxism, logical fetishism.
Logical fetishism? Too much fetishizing logic?
He just he tries to make his lemmas consistent. I just can't abide that as an economist, from the
No. I love the logical fetishism. like he's too logical.
The right loves to do that debate team shit until they start losing with it.
Who?
I mean, I don't know. Right critics in general, they're like,
yeah.
Oh, logical fetishism. It has Ben Shapiro vibes.
Yeah. Go ahead. Marx's loss
of capacity for mental flights and so forth. And yet both of those arguments are based on a rather crude error. The same one-sided vulgarization of the subject which induced Mr. Bulgakov to raise one of the impossible cases.
One of the possible cases.
One of the possible cases. Diminishing productivity of additional investments of capital to the level of the universal law of diminishing returns brings him to the present instance to employ the concept of monopoly uncritically and to convert it into something universal. In doing so, he confuses the results which accrue under the capitalist organization of agriculture from the limitedness of land on the one hand and private property in land on the other hand. These are two different things, as we shall explain.
Obviously, like limitedness in land is like the earth is like, I mean, like we're not getting more land, but the private property of land is somebody putting a fence around it and saying, mine.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just need to make the earth more efficient or something, then it'll get bigger. The condition, although not the source of the appearance of ground rent, writes Mr. Bulgakov, is the same as that which gives rise to the possibility of the monopolization of land. The fact that the productivity of the land is limited, while man's growing need for it is limitless. Instead of the productivity of the land is limited, he should have said land is limited.
Correct.
As we have shown, limitedness of the productivity of the land implies limitedness of the given technical level, the given state of the productive forces. You know, like tractor plows, combine shit versus donkeys.
Literally, yeah, land is limited.
Under the capitalist system of society, the limitedness of land does indeed presuppose monopolization of land, but of land as an object of an economy and not as an object of property rights. The assumption of the capitalist organization of agriculture necessarily includes the assumption that all land is occupied by separate private enterprises. But it in no way includes the assumption that the whole of the land is private property of those farmers or of other persons, or that it is in general private property. The monopoly of land ownership based on property rights and the monopoly of the land economy are two entirely different things, not only logically, but historically. Logically, we can quite easily imagine a purely capitalist organization of agriculture in which private property in land is entirely absent, in which the land is the property of the state or of a village commune or etc. In actual practice, we see that in all developed capitalist countries, the whole of the land is occupied by separate private enterprises, but these enterprises exploit not only their own lands, but also those rented from other landowners, from the state or the village or communes. For example, in Russia, where, as is well known, the private enterprises established on the peasant communal lands are principally capitalist peasant enterprises. Not without reason did Marx, at the very beginning of his analysis of rent, observe that the capitalist mode of production meets in its first stages and subordinates to itself the most varied forms of landed property, from the clan property to feudal landed property handed down to the property of the peasant commune. Thus, the limitedness of land necessarily presupposes the monopolization of the economy of the land under the domination of capitalism. The question arises, what are the necessary consequences of this monopolization in relation to the problem of rent? The limitedness of land results in the price of grain being determined by the conditions of production, not on the average land, but on the worst land under cultivation. This price of grain enables the farmer, the capitalist entrepreneur in agriculture, to convert his cost of production.
To cover.
To recover.
No, to cover.
To cover his cost of production. I swear I really am becoming dyslexic. To cover his cost of production and gives him the average rate of profit on his capital. The farmer on the better land obtains an additional profit, which forms a differential rent. The question as to whether private property in land exists has nothing whatever to do with the question of the formation of differential rent, which is inevitable in capitalist agriculture, even on communal land, state, or non-private lands. The only consequence of the limitedness of land under capitalism is the formation of differential rent arising out of the difference in productivity of various investments of capital. Mr. Bulgakov sees a second consequence in the elimination of free competition in agriculture, when he says that the absence of this free competition prevents agricultural capital from participating in the formation of average profit. Obviously, he confuses the question of land cultivation with the right of property in land. The only thing that logically flows from the limitedness of land, irrespective of private property in land, is that the land will be entirely occupied by capitalist farmers. But it by no means follows that free competition among those farmers will necessarily be restricted in any way. Limitedness. God dang it. The little thingy slid away from me. Limitedness of land is a general phenomenon which inevitably leaves its impress upon the whole of capitalist agriculture. The logical unsoundness of confusing these different things is clearly confirmed by history. We shall not speak of England, where the separation of land ownership from land cultivation is obvious, where free competition amongst farmers is almost limitless, where capital obtained from commerce and industry is invested in agriculture on the widest scale. But in all other capitalist countries, notwithstanding the opinion of Mr. Bulgakov, who, following Mr. Struve, vainly strives to place English rent in a special category, the same process of the separation of land ownership from land cultivation is actual, although in extremely varied forms. Sorry, I lost the end of that sentence. Mr. Struve vainly strives to place the English rent in a special category. The same process of the separation of land ownership from land cultivation is actual, although in extremely varied forms, leases and mortgages. Wonder if it's
examples of extremely like leases and mortgages.
I see. Okay. Leases and mortgages. In failing to see that this process, strongly emphasized by Marx, Mr. Bulgakov has failed to see the main thing. In all European countries, after the fall of serfdom, we see the decay of land ownership based on social estates, the mobilization of landed property, the investment of merchant and industrial capital in agriculture, an increase in tenant farming, and an increase in the mortgaging of land. In Russia, also despite the most pronounced survivals of serfdom, we see after the reform an increased purchasing of land by peasants, commoners, and merchants, and an increased leasing of privately owned state and village communal lands. What do all of these phenomena prove? They prove that free competition has entered agriculture despite the monopoly of landed property and regardless of the infinite variety of its forms. In all capitalist countries at the present time, every owner of capital can invest his money in agriculture by purchasing or leasing land as easily or almost as easily as he can invest in any branch of commerce or industry. In arguing against Marx's theory of differential rent, Mr. Bulgakov says that all these differences in the conditions of production of agricultural products are contradictory and may, our italics, mutually eliminate each other. As Rodbertus pointed out, distance may be counteracted by fertility. Different degrees of fertility may be equalized by more intensive cultivation of the more fertile plots. A pity, indeed, that our strict scientist should have forgotten that Marx noted this fact and was able to apprise it not so one-sidedly. Marx wrote, "It is evident that these two different causes of differential rent, fertility and location of plots of land, may work in opposite directions. A certain plot of land may be very favorably located and yet be very poor in fertility, and vice versa. This circumstance is important, for it explains how it is possible that bringing into cultivation the land of a certain country may equally well proceed from the better to the worse land as vice versa. Finally, it is clear that the progress of social production in general has, on the one hand, the effect of evening out differences arising from location of plots of land as a cause of ground rent by creating local markets and improving locations by establishing communication and transportation facilities. On the other hand, it increases the differences in individual locations of plots of land by separating agriculture from manufacturing and forming large centers of production. On one hand, while relatively isolating agricultural districts, on the others, while relatively isolating agricultural districts on the other, and then there's a translation. Let's see. Thus, while Mr. Bulgakov triumphantly repeats...
Oh, okay, he says something in German. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Relative Waren Sammlung.
We don't have to read the German thing. I'll figure. We'll translate the German later. I don't speak German. Okay.
Relative something of the lands.
Yeah.
Thus, while Mr. Bulgakov triumphantly repeats the long-known references to the possibility of the mutual elimination of the differences, Marx presents the further problem to the transformation of this possibility into reality and shows that simultaneously with the equalizing influences, there are to be observed differentiating influences. The final result of these mutually contradictory influences is, as everyone knows, that in all countries, plots of land differ considerably, both fertility and in location. Can you imagine if they didn't differ in location or fertility?
Location.
All of the land is just one big land and it has
like
one
on top of each other. Yeah.
It's just a land sandwich. Mr. Bulgakov's objection merely reveals that he was not given any thought whatsoever to his observations. Yeah. Continuing his argument, Mr. Bulgakov says that the conception of the last and the least productive investment of labor and capital is employed uncritically both by Ricardo and Marx. It is not difficult to see what an arbitrary element is introduced by this conception.
Okay, let me do this because there's a little bit of an error. Translation. Okay. Let the amount of capital invested in land be equal to 10A, and let each successive A as an area represent a diminishing productivity. The total product of the soil will be A, big A. Obviously, the average productivity will be of each of the small a will be equal to A divided by 10. And if the total capital is regarded as a single whole, then the price will be determined precisely by this average productivity. Obviously, we say in reply to this, behind his slurred phrases about the limited productivity of land, Mr. Bulgakov has failed to see a trifle the limitedness of land. This limitedness, irrespective of the form of property in land, creates a certain kind of monopoly, since all the land is occupied by farmers, and since there's a demand for the whole of the grain produced on the whole of the land, including the worst land and the remotest from the market, it is clear that the price of grain is determined by the price of production on the worst land, or the price of production connected with the last and least productive investment of capital. Mr. Bulgakov's average productivity is a futile exercise in arithmetic, for the limitedness of land prevents the actual formation of this average. For this average productivity to form and to determine the prices, every capitalist in general not only be able to invest in capital in agriculture to the extent that the free competition, as we have said, it exists in agriculture, but he must be able to at all times to establish new agricultural enterprises in addition to those already existing. If this were possible, there would be no difference whatsoever between agricultural and industry, and rent could not come into existence. Precisely because of the limitedness of land, this is not the case. You're right. Like in a factory, you don't really have to take more and more land. Like you can just like produce more stuff. But agriculture, it's kind of like there is like a nature God limit.
Yeah, you can't just like I work in a factory and like we get to put a bunch more shit in our factory without having to have any more factory. You can just add more machines or whatever, and it's like you can't. Yeah, like you're saying, you can't add land, obviously.
Yeah. You want me to continue, or do you want to go?
Tell me where you left off.
I left off, and okay, I don't know where. Okay, let me look. Okay, to proceed. Until now, we have pursued our argument without taking into account the question of property in land. We have seen that this method was necessary for logical considerations, as well as for the reason that historical data show that capitalist agriculture emerged and developed under various forms of land ownership. Now let's introduce this new condition. Let us assume that all land is privately owned. How will this affect rent? Differential rent will be collected by the landowner from the farmer on the basis of his right of ownership. Since differential rent is the surplus profit above and the normal average profit on capital, and since free competition in the sense of free investment of capital in agriculture exists, thus being created by capitalist development, the landowner will always find a farmer who will be satisfied with the average profit and who will give him the surplus profit. Private property in land does not create differential rent. It merely transferred it from the hands of the farmer to the hands of the landowner. Is the influence of private land ownership restricted to that? Can we assume that the landowner will permit the farmer to exploit gratis the worst and most inconveniently located land which only produces the average on capital? Naturally not. Land ownership is a monopoly, and on the basis of this monopoly, the landowner demands payment from the farmer for this land also. The payment will be absolute rent, which has no connection whatever with the difference in productivity of various investments in capital, which has its genesis in the private ownership of land. In accusing Marx of making an arbitrary twofold interpretation of the same monopoly, Mr. Bulgakov did not take the trouble to consider that we're actually dealing with a twofold monopoly. The first place, we have a monopoly capitalist of the land economy, as in agricultural economy. This monopoly originates in the limitedness of land and is therefore inevitable in any capitalist society. This monopoly leads to the determination of the price of grains by the conditions of production on the worst land, the surplus profit obtained by the investment of capital on the belier land, or a more productive investment of capital forms differential rent. This rent comes into being quite independently of private property in land, which simply enables the landowner to take it from the farmer. In the second place, we have the monopoly of private property in land. Neither logically nor historically is this monopoly inseverably linked with the previous monopoly. Example is like when all the feudalism switched to capitalism. There is nothing in this monopoly that is essential to capitalist society and to capitalist organization of agriculture. On the one hand, we can quite easily conceive of capitalist agriculture without private property in land. Indeed, many consistent bourgeois economists have demanded the nationalization of land. On the other hand, even in practice, we meet with capitalist organization of agriculture without private ownership of land, example, on state and village commune lands. Consequently, it is necessary to distinguish between these two kinds of monopolies, as well as to recognize that absolute rent, which is engendered by private property in land, exists side by side with differential rent. Now, can
Marx, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Marx explains the possibility of the formation of absolute rent from the surplus value of agricultural capital by the fact that in agriculture, the share of variable capital in the total composition of capital is above the average. A quite natural assumption in the view of the undoubted backwardness of agricultural as compared to industrial technique. This being the case, it follows that the value of agricultural products, generally speaking, is higher than the cost of their production, and that the surplus value is higher than profit. Really? The monopoly of private property and land, however, prevents the surplus from passing wholly into the process of equalizing profits, and the absolute rent is taken from this surplus.
That makes sense. I'll explain it tomorrow. But okay, live. Go ahead.
Sure. Mr. Bulgakov is greatly dissatisfied with this explanation, and he exclaims, "What kind of thing is this surplus value which, like cloth or cotton or some other commodity, can suffice or not suffice to cover a possible demand? In the first place, it is not a material thing. It is a concept which serves to express a definite social relationship of production. This contrasting of a material thing to a concept is a striking example of the scholasticism which is now so freely offered in the guise of criticism. What would be the use of a concept of the share of social product if it were not definite material things corresponding to that concept? Surplus value is the money equivalent of surplus product, which consists of a definite share of cloth, cotton, grain, and of all other commodities. The word definite must not, of course, be understood in the sense that science can concretely define that share, but in the sense that the conditions in which, in general, outline the dimensions of this share are known. Yeah, it's not like a quantum or like a bit. Yeah, obviously. In agriculture, the supply, the surplus product is in proportion to the capital. Reading that again. Yeah, I was listening to a lot of Dave Emery, and he does that. He'll just like completely like shit a sentence up, and then like he'll just be like starting from the top.
Yeah, just do that, and then no one can tell.
In agriculture, the surplus product is larger in proportion to the capital than the other branches of industry. And this surplus, which does not enter into the equalization of profit owing to the monopoly of private property and land, may naturally suffice or not suffice to cover the demand of the monopolist landowner. We shall not burden the reader with a detailed exposition of the theory of rent, which Mr. Bulgakov has created, as he modestly remarks, by his own efforts, pursuing his own path. A few remarks will suffice it to characterize this product of the last and least productive investment of professional. Does that mean that Bulgakov is the least productive?
Yeah, that's the joke here.
That's pretty good.
That's okay. This is good.
The least valuable professor, the professor that will teach the marginal class.
Exactly. Okay.
Yep. The new theory of rent is brewed according to an ancient recipe. What is worth doing at all is worth doing thoroughly. Since free competition exists, then without any restrictions, although free competition has nowhere at no time existed. Since monopoly exists, there is nothing more to be said. Consequently, rent is not taken from surplus value, and not even from the agricultural product. It is taken from the product of non-agricultural labor. It is simply a tribute, a tax, a deduction from the social product, a promissory note in favor of the landlord. Agricultural capital, with its profit in agricultural labor, agriculture in general as a sphere of investment for capital and labor, and therefore a status in statu, a state within a state. In the kingdom of capitalism, all definitions of capitalism, surplus value, wages, and of value generally are imaginary quantities when applied to agriculture. So now everything is clear. Both capitalist and workers in agriculture are imaginary quantities. But if Mr. Bulgakov's at times wanders into the clouds, he, at others, argues not altogether irrationally. 14 pages farther on, we read, the production of agricultural products costs society a certain quantity of labor. That is the value of these products. He just reinvented labor theory of value, but like really shitty. Excellent. Consequently, at least the definition of value is not altogether an imaginary quantity. Farther, we read, since production is organized on a capitalist basis, and since capitalist stands at the head of production, the price of grain will be determined by the price of production. That is, the productivity of the given labor and capital will be calculated according to the average social productivity. Fine. Consequently, the definitions of capital, surplus value, and wages are not altogether imaginary quantities. Consequently, free competition, although not absolutely free, exists. For unless capital could flow from agriculture into industry and vice versa, the calculation of productivity according to the average social productivity would be impossible. Again, the monopoly in land causes the price to rise above the value to the limits permitted by market conditions. Excellent. But where has Mr. Bulgakov seen that? Tribute, taxes, promissory notes, etc., are dependent upon market conditions? If the monopoly causes prices to rise to the limits permitted by the market conditions, then the only difference between the new theory of rent and the old is this: the author, pursuing his own path, failed to understand the difference between the influence of the limitedness of land and the influence of private property in land on the one hand, and in connection between I'm sorry, I'll just take that sentence from the top again.
No, it's okay. And the connection.
Such a long sentence. He really does need to make his sentences shorter. If that's my one criticism of Lenin, he could use it.
No, he doesn't. I'll explain why. So what goes on in Russian, they are perfectly fine. It's just because of the way the English language is structured, you can't infinite. Like in Russian, you can add.
You have to have a finite number of clauses, or it just gets really
No. Okay, so for example, let me give you. Okay, actually, read this, and then I'll give you the example.
Okay.
We're almost done.
Yes. The new theory, the old theory is this. If the monopoly causes the price to rise to the limits permitted by the market conditions, then the only difference between this new theory of rent and the old is this: the author, pursuing his own path, failed to understand the difference between the influence of the limitedness of land and the influence of private property in land upon the one hand, and the connection between the concept monopoly and the concept the last and least productive investment of labor and capital on the other. It is surprising, therefore, that 7 pages farther on, Mr. Bulgakov should completely lose sight of his own theory and argue about the method of distributing this agricultural product among the landowner and the capitalist farmer and the agricultural laborers. A brilliant finale to a brilliant criticism. A remarkable outcome of the new Bulgakov theory of rent, which henceforth will enrich the science of political economy. God, he's just fucking biting.
Okay.
He's like the grandmaster of fake polite.
No. This is like him, like just being like sarcastic as hell. Okay, a brilliant. Okay. So the thing is that you can actually make infinite, like really long sentences, because in Russian, I don't know how to. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so if you say word order doesn't matter in Russian, so let's say that I give you a potato. I would say, я даю тебе картофель. Or you could say тебе даю я картофель, and it would still mean the same thing. Because I'm giving you a potato. I don't know why I gave you a French fry, but whatever.
Oh, it's still a potato. Okay,
but so then because the word order doesn't matter, you can complicate the sentence. Like I give my best friend's husband a Idaho potato. So it could be я даю свой муж. Нет. Okay. Best friend's husband. It would be муж лучшей подруги. Okay. So свой муж лучшей подруги картофель. And so then when you start making each description more and more complicated, when the word order doesn't matter. Yeah. It's hard. In English, it feels like a super long sentence, but in Russian, it doesn't, because you understand what each thing is connected to. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I don't know. I'm not very good with languages. Like, I can pronounce.
No, you don't have to worry about pronouncing. It's just word order doesn't matter. So I can say, so if I want to say, I eat, like, you can't say potatoes eat I. It sounds like Yoda.
But you can do it in Russian?
Yeah, you can say kartoffel, yeah, and yeah, yeah. Or you could say più vino, or vino più yeah, and it'll still mean the same thing. And so based on what you want to emphasize, you're going to put it in different orders. And so sometimes Lenin's funnier in Russian. Anyways. Right. Thank you so much for coming. And you are Comrade Garfield on Twitter, right?
Communist Garfield.
Oh, Communist Garfield. Sorry. Okay.
It's just a posting account. I don't have like anything to promote or whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And I'm going to have you on the other pod to talk about eugenics and pseudosciences. It was great. And maybe we should have you back again to read the remaining chapters.
Sure. And with the stuff about like the scientific racism shit, just like pick a couple of topics. I can put together a bibliography and like pull quotes.
How about you pick the topic you want to talk about on the pod?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll start writing a
outline.
An outline for like that. Okay, great.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. And with that, I will say do svidaniya. No, that's not my ending, but I don't care. This is not a real ending.
Narodu.
Oh, yeah. Slobodu narodu smrti fascismu.
Yeah, all right. Bye.
Hey, I'm back. I had some nachos because I was really hungry for some odd reason. All this laughing and reading. Oh, can you hear me? All this laughing and reading Lenin makes me hungry, I guess. So I had some nachos. Oh yeah. Trevor Noah's dumb thing can be debunked in one sentence. In the Council for Foreign Relations brief on March 21st, 2021, they literally say that China is not doing imperialism. Also, if you know what imperialism looks like, if you don't just like read anything about the Congo and look at how many hands everyone has these days versus when there was actual imperialism, and you'll realize that imperialism is not building trains and building so I've debunked it like so many times. I just don't have the patience to bring up the Council for Foreign Relations, that little line where they admit this, but I can do it next week since most of you will be bored. People in theory love Christmas, but in practice they hate Christmas. I noticed that, so we'll be around extra for you guys to enjoy content, because when others are down, let's see, can I mute while others read? No, I can't. That's a conversation. And okay, so back to the drill. How many people are watching? I don't know. Let's see, is it even worth it? Yeah, I will read from Nadezhda Reminiscence if there is like a non-0% of the population, like if like more than like 5 people are, okay, 15 people are, okay, I'll read it. I just don't like dealing with people who are whiny, like Kevin, who's like, can you mute? No, I cannot mute. Because the entire point is having a conversation, and Lenin's collected works is public, so you can just kind of read it, and you don't have to watch this if you are bothered by my laughter. And so with that, I will say that the function of how long I read will depend on how many super chats and or paid subscriptions go to historically.substack.com/subscribe or send in a super chat. Last week we left off where Lenin, in this book, where Lenin goes to London for exile. So we will start with life in London, if you can see it. And I'll answer good faith questions, but I have to turn off the stream. Otherwise, if I have people, I can't. Okay. So with that, let's begin. We arrived in, I'm a little not centered. Okay, now. We arrived in London in April 1902. The immensity of London staggered us. Although the weather was filthy, I kind of blended weather and filthy with wealthy. Although the weather was filthy the day we arrived, Vladimir Ilyich brightened up at once and began to look around the citadel of capitalism with curiosity. Plekhanov and the editorial conflicts, for the moment, forgotten. At the station, we were met by, that's a weird use of passive tense, but whatever. We were met by Nikolai Alexeyev, a political immigrant living in London who had mastered the English language. He acted as our guide at the beginning as we found ourselves rather helpless. We thought we knew English, having in fact translated a thick book in Siberia from English into Russian, the Webb's book. I had studied English in prison from a self-instructor, but had never heard a word of spoken English. When we started translating the Webbs in Shushenskaya, Vladimir Ilyich had been horrified at my pronunciation. My sister has an English teacher. No, I can't. I need to figure out how to do an Irish accent so I can do a better Lenin in English. Okay. Teacher, but she never sounded like that, he said. I did not argue. I started learning over again. When we arrived in London, we found we could not understand a thing, nor could anybody understand us. It got us into comical situations at first. It amused Vladimir Ilyich, but at the same time put him on his mettle. He tackled English in earnest. We started going to all kinds of meetings, getting as close as we could to the speaker and carefully watching his mouth. We went fairly often to the Hyde Park. At the beginning, speakers there harangued the strolling crowds on all kinds of subjects. One man, an atheist, tried to prove to a group of curious listeners that there was no God. This must have been the Richard Dawkins of 1902. Yeah. Okay. I forgot. We particularly liked one such speaker. He had an Irish accent, which we were better able to understand. Interesting. Next to him, a Salvation Army officer who was shouting out hysterical appeals to Almighty God. While a little way off, a salesman was holding forth about the drudgery of shop assistants in the big stores. Listening to the English speech helped us a lot. Afterwards, Vladimir Ilyich found two Englishmen through an advertisement who wished to take Russian lessons in exchange for English and began studying assiduously with them. He got to know the language fairly well. Vladimir Ilyich studied London too. He did not go to the museums. I meant the ordinary museums, not the British Museum. Oh, I just saw a really funny joke by Yugopnik about the British Museum. So let me just say this. Why is the Taj Mahal still in India? Because it was too heavy to carry to the British Museum. That was really funny. I can't go to the British Museum without if I ever, oh my, I would probably flip out at everything. I'm like, that belongs in India. That's stolen. It's like, I mean, if you are such a big looter, why would you? It's like it just pisses me off. Like, they are the biggest looters and they're proud of their looting, and they have it in a museum and you have to pay money to watch them steal from you. No, I will never go to the British Museum. Sorry. I get very passionate about the British Museum. But yeah, they should return all the things that they've looted. Oh, including the word loot, lutana from Hindi, to India, of course, and all the other nations that they've looted from. Okay. I shall. Literally, the word British Museum triggers me, if you can tell. Where he spent half his time, attracted not by the museum itself, good instincts, but by the world's richest libraries and the facilities it offered for study. After 10 minutes in the museum proper, Vladimir Ilyich got very tired, and we would usually make a quick exit from the rooms hung about with medieval armor. Oh my God. So he didn't actually visit the stolen from India section. Okay, good. And endless halls filled with Egyptian and other ancient vessels. I remember only one museum Vladimir Ilyich could not tear himself away from, the Museum of the 1848 Revolution in Paris, housed in one little room in Rue des Cordeliers, I believe, where he examined every little every drawing. Ilyich studied living London. He liked taking long rides through the town on top of the bus. He liked the busy traffic of the vast commercial city, the quiet squares with elegant houses wreathed in greenery where only small broughams drew up. There were other places too, mean little streets tenanted by London's working people with clotheslines stretched across the road and anemic children playing on the doorsteps. To these places we used to go on foot, observing these startling contrasts between wealth and poverty. Ilyich would mutter in English through clenched teeth, two nations. It's gotten worse in London, really, like the poverty and the wealth. Oh, Krishna! Fudge. I dropped my keyboard. Okay, let's continue. And it's kind of funny. I usually say Krishna nowadays. I don't say any. Yeah. Wait, I don't know. Or sometimes I say Rama. Okay. I forgot. From even the top of the bus, one could observe many characters' scenes. Ill-clad lumpen proletarian with pasty faces hung around the pubs. One would often see among them a drunken woman with a bruised eye wearing a trailing velvet dress from which the sleeve had been ripped off. Once from the top of the bus, we saw a huge bobby, which is a cop in England, with his typical helmet and chin strap hustling before him with an iron hand, a puny little urchin, as in like an orphan on the street, who had evidently been caught stealing while a crowd followed behind them, whooping and whistling. Some of the people on the bus jumped up and began hooting at the little thief, too. Well, Ilyich would mutter sadly. Once or twice we took a ride on top of the bus to some working-class districts on payday evening. An endless row of stalls, each lit up by a flare, stretched along the pavement of a wide road. These pavements packed with the noisy crowd of working men and women who were buying all kinds of things and satisfying their hunger right there on the spot. Vladimir Ilyich always felt drawn to the working class crowds. Whenever there was a crowd, he was sure to be there, whether it was an outing in the country where the tired workers, glad to escape from the city, lay about for hours on the grass, or a public house or a reading room. There are many reading rooms in London. Just a single room opening straight onto the street where there is not even a seat. Just a reading desk with newspaper files. I wonder what happened to these reading rooms in London. Because last time I went was like 2007, and I don't remember seeing any reading rooms in London, but I could be wrong. London. Or was it 2008 or 7? I can't remember. When did I last go to London? Who cares? Long time ago. I forgot where I was. Reading rooms. Okay. The reader takes a file, and when he is finished with it, he hangs it back in its place. Ilyich, in years to come, wanted to have such reading rooms organized everywhere in our own country. He visited eating houses and churches. I don't know what eating houses are. I need to ask Mango when I'm on there next. In English churches, the service is usually followed by a short lecture and a debate. Ilyich was particularly fond of those debates because ordinary workers took part in them. He scanned the newspapers for notices of the working class meetings in some out-of-the-way district where there were only rank-and-file workers from the bench, as we say now, without any pomp and leaders. These meetings were usually devoted to the discussion of some question or project, such as a garden city scheme. Ilyich would listen attentively and afterwards say joyfully, "They are just bursting with socialism." If the speaker starts talking rot, a worker gets up right away and takes the bull by the horns and shows up with the very essence of capitalism. In the rank-and-file British worker who had preserved his class instinct in the face of everything, it was the rank-and-file British worker who had preserved his class instinct in the face of everything that Ilyich always relied upon. Visitors to Britain usually saw only the labor aristocracy, the corrupted by the bourgeois, and itself bourgeoisified. Naturally, Ilyich studied that upper stratum too, and the concrete forms this bourgeoisie influence took, without for a moment forgetting the significance of that fact. But he also tried to discover the motive forces of future revolution in England. I guess he never discovered it. There was hardly a meeting anywhere we did not go to. Once we wandered into a socialist church. And there are such churches in England. Do they still exist? Oh, okay. The socialist in charge was droning through the Bible and then delivered a sermon to the effect that the exodus of Jews from Egypt symbolized the exodus of workers from the kingdom of capitalism into the kingdom of socialism. Everyone stood up and sang from a socialist hymn book. "Lead us, O Lord, from the kingdom of capitalism into the kingdom of socialism." Oh, I hope there's a video of this. This is so adorable. We went to that church again afterwards. It was the Seven Sisters Church. To hear a talk for young people. A young man spoke about municipal socialism and tried to prove that no revolution was needed. It was the socialist who had officiated as clergyman during our first visit that declared he had been a member of the party for 12 years, and for 12 years he had been fighting opportunism. And that was what municipal socialism was. Opportunism, pure and simple. We knew little about English socialists in their home surroundings. This almost looks like she's this almost sounds like, I don't know, she's like observing animals in their natural habitat. We saw the English in their natural habitat outside of India, not being colonizers. I like it. Okay. The English are a reserved people. They regarded the bohemianism of the Russian immigrants with naive wonder. I remember talking to an English socialist we once met at the Takterievs, asking me, "Do you mean to say you've been in prison?" If my wife were put in prison, I don't know what I'd do. I just can't imagine it. How strong these petty bourgeoisie prejudices were when we had an opportunity of observing, in the case of our landlady's family, a working class family, but she was a landlady anyways, and the Englishmen we exchanged lessons with. This was where we were able to study to our heart's content all the abysmal philistinism of a petty bourgeoisie English life. One of the Englishmen who came to us for his lesson was the manager of a large bookstore. He contended that socialist was a theory that set the most correct value on things. I am a convinced socialist, he said. At one time, I even started to make socialist speeches, but then my employer sent for me and said he had no need for socialists, and if I wanted to keep my job, I would have to hold my tongue. Well, I thought socialism is inevitable whether I speak for it or not, and I have a wife and children to look after. I no longer tell anyone that I'm a socialist, but you, I can tell. This Mr. Raymond, who had been nearly all over Europe, lived in Australia and other places, and spent most of his life in London, had not seen half of what Vladimir Ilyich managed to see in London during his 1 year stay there. One day, Ilyich dragged him off to a meeting in Whitechapel. Oh, have you seen that show? Okay, it's a good show. Okay, whatever. Okay, let's see. How many people do we have to see if it's... I should also later check the statistics to see if people listen to this. Oh, we have more people. Okay, then we're staying. Okay. Whitechapel. Like most Englishmen, Mr. Raymond had never been in that part of London, inhabited mostly by Russian Jews who lived a life of their own, unlike that of the rest of the city. He was astonished at what he saw. We were in the habit of going in for rambles in the suburbs too. More often than not, we went to Primrose Hill. This was the cheapest trip, the fare only costing 6 pence. The hill commanded a view of almost the whole of London and a vast smoke-wreathed wilderness of houses. From here, we took long walks into the park and country lanes. Another reason we liked going to Primrose Hill was because it was near the cemetery where Karl Marx was buried. We used to go there. In London, we met a member of our St. Petersburg group, Apolniara Yakubova. Back in St. Petersburg, she had been a very active worker. Everyone had thought highly of her and liked her, and she and I were bound still closer by the fact that we had worked together in the Sunday school in the Nevskaya Zastava district and had a common friend in the person of Lydia Knepovich. I believe she is Pyotr Struve's wife, but I could be wrong. After escaping from Siberian exile, Apollinaria married Takteryov, a former editor of Rabochaya Misl, which means workers' thought. It's like a really pretentious journal that Lenin trolled. They were now living in London but took no part in our activities. Apollinaria was delighted when we arrived, and the Takteryovs took us under their wing and helped us fix us up in a cheap, fairly comfortable lodgings. We saw the Takteryovs very often, but as the subject of Rabochaya Misl was generally avoided, our relationship had a strained quality. Once or twice there was an explosion and we had it out. In January of 1903, I believe, the Takteryevs officially declared their sympathy with the Iskra trend. My mother was due to arrive soon, and we decided to set up on our own by renting 2 rooms and having meals at home. We found all those oxtails, skates, fried and fat, and indigestible cakes were not made for Russian stomachs. Besides, we were living at the organization's expense, and that meant we had to economize every penny, and living at home would be cheaper. As far as secrecy was concerned, conditions could not have been better. No identity papers were needed in London at that time, and one could go under any name. We took the name of Richter. Another advantage was that all foreigners look alike to English people, and our landlady took us for Germans all the time we were there. Shortly, Martov and Vera Zasulich arrived and set up a communal household with the Alexeyev in a continental-style apartment not far away from us. Vladimir Ilyich made immediate arrangements to work at the British Museum. He usually went there first thing in the morning, while Martov and Martov came early in the morning too, would go through the mail together. This way, Vladimir Ilyich was relieved of much of the tiresome routine. The conflict with Plekhanov was over, more or less. Vladimir Ilyich took a month off to go to Brittany to see his mother and his sister Anna, and spend a few weeks with them by the seaside. He loved he loved the sea with its incessant movement and vast spaces, and he could relax properly there. By the way, artsy Marxist has drawn Lenin by the sea, so if you can afford a bid for her painting, she needs it. She's ill and she's having some kind of treatment. I can't remember exactly what, but she'll tell you. Lenin by the sea. Okay. In London, we immediately started getting visitors. Ina Smedovich Dimka came too. She soon after left for Russia. Another visitor was her brother Pyotr, who had the initiative of Vladimir Ilyich, had been christened Matryona. Matryona, little mother? I don't know. He had come out of prison after serving a long term and become an ardent Iskraist. He considered himself an expert at erasing passports, the secret which he claimed was the use of sweat. He would turn all the tables in the commune upside down to serve as presses for sponging out passports. This technique was extremely primitive, as was the whole of our secrecy techniques at that time. Rereading today the correspondence we carried on with Russia makes one marvel at the naivete of our secrecy methods. All those letters about handkerchiefs meaning passports, brewing beer and warm fur, illegal literature, and all the code names for towns beginning with the same letter as the town, Osip for Odessa, Tereti for Tver, Petr for Poltava, and Pasha for Pskov, and so on. All that substituting of a woman's name for men and vice versa, the whole thing was so thin, so transparent. It had not struck us as naive at the time. To a certain extent, it had succeeded in throwing the police off the track. There had not been so much agents provocateurs at the beginning as there were later. All our people were trustworthy and well known to each other. The Iskra agents were working in Russia who took deliveries of all literatures from abroad, Iskra and Zarya pamphlets. They saw to it that Iskra literature was reprinted at the illegal printing plants and distributed to the various locals. They arranged for correspondence to be delivered to Iskra and saw to it that it kept informed of all the illegal work being conducted in Russia and collected money for the newspaper. In Samara, at Sonia's, there were the rodents, the I don't know how to pronounce this. Krzyzhnakovskys. Claire Gleb Krzyzhnovsky and Snail, his wife Zinaida. Lenin's sister Maria Bearcub was also lived there. A kind of center was quickly forming in Samara. The Krzyzhnovskys had a knack of gathering people around them. Lengnik Kurz moved to the south, lived for a time at Poltava's, at Petya's, then in Kiev. In Astrakhan, there was Lydia Knipovich, uncle. In Pskov, Lepshinsky, Bastcho, and Lyubov Radchenko, Pasha, and Stepan Radchenko was utterly worn out and had given up illegal work. But then his brother, alias Arkady, alias Kasyan, worked unflaggingly for Iskra. He was a traveling agent. Another traveling agent who delivered Iskra all over Russia was Sylvan, vagabond. In Moscow, there was Bauman, alias Victor Tree Rook, working closely in contact with Ivan Babushkin, alias Bogdan, which means son of God, Bogmidka. Other agents were Yelena Sastova, alias Thick and Absolute, which was closely associated with the St. Petersburg organization. Gliafira Okaluva, who after the arrest of Bauman had moved to Moscow, where she lived at the Old Women's under the name Baby Hair. With all carrots. I'm getting carrots, and Markov is carrot. I don't know. With all of these people, Iskra carried on a lively correspondence. Vladimir Ilyich looked through every letter. We knew exactly what the various Iskra agents were doing and discussed all their work with them. When they lost touch with one another, we put them in touch again and informed them of arrests and so on. Iskra had a printing press working for it in Baku, Azerbaijan. Oh, by the way, listen to the Historically episode about the history of Azerbaijan in Der and Baku again. It's one of my favorites. Oh, okay. The work was carried in the strictest secrecy. The Yanukudzi brothers worked there, and Krazin, horse, was the manager. The plant was called Nina. Afterwards, an attempt was made to run a printing press in Novgorod, Akulina we called it, but it was soon suppressed. The former secret plant at Kishinev, run by Akim, Leon Goldman, had fallen through by this time. Shipments were made via Vilna, which is Lithuania, through Grunia. I don't know what that means. The St. Petersburg comrades tried to arrange transport through Stockholm. We had heaps of correspondence over this avenue, which operated under the name of beer. We shipped literature to Stockholm by the hundredweight, and we received confirmation that the beer had been delivered. We were sure that it was being received in St. Petersburg and went on sending to Stockholm. It was not until 1905, when we were returning to Russia, we learned that the beer was still in the brewery. In other words, Stockholm's people houses, where a whole stack of cellars was stacked with literature. I wonder if they still have it there, like as like a museum display or something. That'd be cool. At the Stockholm. If anyone lives in Stockholm, can you guys figure this out? Like, this would be really cool to visit. Yeah, this would be really cool to visit. Okay. The smaller casks, which were shipped to Vardo, which I don't know where it is. Somebody look this up. Only one parcel, I believe, was received, and then some hitch occurred. Matryoshna was sent to live in Marseille. She was to arrange shipment through the cooks working on the boats to Batum. That's brilliant. Okay. I don't know where Batum is, but cooks working on the boats, that's actually brilliant. Okay. Their delivery of literature was organized by the Baku comrades, Azerbaijan, the horses. Most of the literature was thrown into the sea. It was wrapped up in tarpaulin and dropped overboard at a prearranged spot where our comrades fished it out. Wow. Mikhail Kalinin, a member of our organization, was then working at a factory in St. Petersburg and gave a sailor an address in Toulon through Sastova Thick. Literature was also shipped via Alexandria, Egypt, and transportation was arranged through Persia. Whoa. Afterwards, it was arranged through Kamenets, Podolsk, and Lvov, Ukraine. Oh, that's so weird. All these shipments ate up a mass of money and energy, and not to mention the tremendous risks involved, and yet not more than a tenth of all we sent or probably ever reached the destination. We used double-bottom trunks, book bindings to smuggle literature. It was all snapped up immediately. What is to be done was a great success. It supplied the answer to a number of vital and pressing questions, and everyone keenly felt the need for an underground organization working according to plan. A conference was opened in Belostok in June 1902 by the Bund Boris. All the delegates, with the exception of the St. Petersburg delegate, were arrested. As a result, Bauman and Sylvan were arrested too. The conference decided to set up an organizing committee for convening a party congress. Delays occurred, however. Representation by the local organizations was required, but these were still an extremely unorganized, heterogeneous nature. For example, in St. Petersburg, the organization was split up into Workers' Committee Manya and the Intellectuals Committee Vanya. Okay, so there is a letter, like there is like one letter I swear that Lenin wrote, like it had me confused. Like he was like, "Don't trust Vanya, like don't let Manya say something to Vanya." And I was like, "Who's Manya and who's Vanya?" But now it makes sense, and I'll dig it up for next week. Yeah, interesting. Vancouver, Washington, and Chicago. Nice. I know that we have one. This is yeah. Okay. So with this, I'm going to have to mark where we are so I don't forget. But I hope you guys enjoyed Manya and Vanya. Yeah, like there is somewhere in Lenin's collected works. Let me just look it up. I know. Let me just look it up because it's going to drive me nuts if I don't. Give me 1 second. Yeah, Kuratchenko. See, I was right. There was a 1902 letter. I don't know how to send it to you guys too. Maybe Janet is still awake. Okay. I'll quickly read it. To I Radchenko. Dear friend, I read your long letter of June 6th over again. Okay. There are more points. Okay. And so give us also with I have not had any views from workers. Also give us a direct contact with your group of workers and also with Manya. It's very important. And then he says something like, if Vanya is with us, how are you to determine your relationships with him? What is your opinion? Perhaps if Vanya and Manya are entirely on our side, they should include you in the central committee. In addition, formally confirm your function for special work on the unification of an all Russia committee. So yeah, this letter had, if it should come into Vanya's head to demand a precise definition of relations between Manya and himself, between his members and the Manya and who are in, I think it would be postponed until we meet there. I think that Vanya should be told straight, one of two things. Either we really see eye to eye, then a month of work together will see us working so smoothly that we will not remain the slightest misunderstanding between us, because we all shall be iskrais, or we shall find ourselves in disagreement, in which case we shall part ways in a proper manner. We don't want to look silly once again by drawing up agreements, etc. From your letter from January 6th, I see that you replied to them at the outset in this sense. And of course, it was an excellent thing to do. Oh, and of course, in the footnote, they say that. Okay. But yeah, this had been driving me nuts. Like, I was like always wondering who Vanya and Manya were, but now I've figured it out. And oh, by the way, well, I'll be here for Christmas because I know you guys, I know the secret, and that's the day to get a lot of viewers because we know the other YouTubers won't, because they'll be miserable, allegedly spending time with family or whatever they're doing over Christmas that they pretend to do, which is not what they're really doing because they're really being bored to death. So we'll be here next Saturday. Janet may not be here, but I'll be here because I know that's the day you get the viewers. And with that, what's up?
I'll be here next Saturday.
Okay, so we both will be here.
New Year's Eve, I might just be a little late.
Well, we don't have a show on New Year's Eve, but we have it on New Year's Day.
Oh.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Unless I'm confusing myself.
Both.
Okay, unless I'm confusing myself.
You can't get rid of me that quick.
Okay. So, well, with that, ho, 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 Merry Christmas. And
bye, everyone.
Bye. Смерти фашизму, свободу народу.